walk us through, DEXAs, bod pods, what some
Sure,
of
yeah.
the pros, cons, and what you've seen in your experience in terms of, things to consider when we're applying some of these methods?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to be said around body composition when it comes to measurements is there's no direct way of measuring it other than dissection.
Mm.
So something I always mention to our students, and that's obviously not an option that's available to us. So anything that we do, we've got to have an understanding that there's certain levels of error in accuracy and reliability and things like that. Um, from my perspective, working with weight categorized sports, in particular combat sports, body composition measurements at the initial stage is just a non-negotiable. It kind of drives me crazy, Mark, when you speak to some practitioners or you even speak to some athletes and they're like, "Oh, can we work together and can you write me a plan?" And I'm like, "Based on what? We have absolutely no idea what we're trying to modulate in terms of composition." So in an ideal world, and this is one that I always tend to get from a lot of practitioners, but in an ideal world, you want to use I guess, a indirect measure such as DEXA or something like that. DEXA is great in the sense that it gives you regional areas for bone mass, fat mass, lean mass tissues, and allows a real, I guess, deep dive on and a more accurate dive on what body composition is. It's not without its errors itself. There's a brilliant paper by that Louise Burke student, Elisa Nana did, which looked at the kind of biological and technical noise
Yep.
within the use of DEXA. So you need a lot of control, in terms of rehydration status and nutritional status, exercise, use of supplementation, and things like that. But that allows you a really good, I guess, overview from my perspective of examining what tissues can be modulated chronically, in particular fat mass. Now, like I say, the other main negative with DEXA is that it does come with a small dose of radiation. It's very, very minuscule compared to something, say, like an X-ray. I
Yep.
think the best way to contextualize it is it's about the equivalent of eating five bananas. So it's a real small dose. But that being said, because you do get a radiological dose, it's not something that you can use all the time. And I know in different countries, and especially here in the UK, the legislation around that is really tightly restricted. Um,
Hmm.
and depending on what you're measuring as well. So, speaking to Craig Sale, obviously an expert in bone, if you were looking at changes in bone mineral density as an example, because it's only measuring a 2D image, but then its calculation is making, I guess, estimations of three-dimensional volumetric
Yep.
perspectives. It's only really valuable to measure with longer time frames between each measurement anyway. So it's not something that you'd want to do every week anyway. So
For
it's a
sure.
sparingly used tool. Big thing that you tend to get from a lot of practitioners is we don't have access to DEXA. Obviously, it's expensive, and I'm lucky being based here at a university. So other good options then are things.
Actually, if we just pin it there real quick,
Yeah, go on.
Carl, and just talk about team sports settings in North America, obviously moved toward DEXA a great deal. And just curious to circle back to that idea around trying to standardize how we test it. Because
Yeah,
depending on the size of the squads, you might be testing 20 players in, say, hockey or basketball. You might be testing 80 players in the
yeah.
NFL. And so when we look at things like meal timing, you mentioned hydration status, training that day, or always trying to carve in some type of testing. Just curious your thoughts on that timing aspect when you get into larger squads and how you've seen it done.
Yeah, so I've measured squads as well. So we've done professional football squads, we've done rugby squads. It is a challenge. So when it does come to that standardization, I mean, we've seen it before where we've done some longitudinal stuff, and guys have come in after they played a game the day prior. Lo and behold, lean mass tissues are way off what they were, at the previous time point and things. So I guess the main thing for me really, Mark, is just try and control the controllables at the very least. Even if you can't follow a gold standard, say of 12 hours food and fluid fasted with no exercise, etc. At least then try and have a standardized procedure where you make it say 4 hours, or
Mm.
again, the big issue that you tend to have where you do want guys to come in fasted is if it is a squad of 80, for example, player one's coming in at 9 a.m. and player 80 is not coming in until 6 p.m. So
Yeah, it's
yeah,
tough.
I kind of appreciate managing that. And again, we've then tried to see, is there a possibility to maybe spread the squad over so many mornings, and
Mhm.
that itself, you know,
Start
one
impacting
morning
coaching
versus
and
another
practice
morning.
plans and
So yeah, look, there's no ideal. I guess the thing for me is just really try and control the controllables, but really appreciate and understand if you don't, you're kind of just putting your finger up in the wind as well. A lot of practitioners, again, who you speak to go, well, we can't do these things, but we want the measurements. And you're like, well, you may as well not do the measurements. So there's got to be a balance between the two. And I get, obviously, working in a multidisciplinary team and, the challenges within team sports and squads and things, but there does need to be that balance between capturing the measurement and getting what you want, but also making sure that there's some degree of standardization. And any body composition measure, I think that's the same. Whether
Mhm.
it be skin folds, the big one in skin folds at the minute, I think with a lot of, a lot of practitioners is the complaint that, oh, I only got 5-10 minutes per player, so to mark them up it takes too long. And again, though, it's like, well, what are you measuring? You know,
Mhm.
within and between squad, if you're not having some degree of standardization. As we said from the beginning, the caveat here is nothing that we're measuring here is direct. It comes with a degree of inaccuracy from the measurement itself.
Yeah, gotta accept
Um,
that and
so you've got to accept that, but then try and reduce the biological and technical variability of you taking the measurement.
mhm.
So yeah, I mean, a good option that I think a lot of teams are starting to use now as well is bioelectrical impedance.
Mhm.
So you do things like underwater weighing, and I mean, again, it remains to be said, underwater weighing still is. It's kind of like in the context of metabolism or exercise physiology. Douglas bags are still the gold standard for measuring.
Mhm.
I guess capturing VO2 or if it was RMR and things like that, they really are still the gold standard. But notwithstanding, it takes a hell of a long time and it's really old school, etc. But
Mhm.
they still are the criterion standard. Underwater weighing is probably still the criterion standard for body composition, given, calculating body density to then subsequent calculations. But again, very rare, I think, these days. So your other option with that is air displacement plasmography, which works on the same principle of, displacement of air within a chamber, i.e. that
Yep.
I think and I'm not sure if there is, the only one I know of really was the bod pod. I don't think there's
Yeah.
another ADP system out there, not that I'm aware of.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, the science of the measurements is sound, but it's only as good as the application. So that in itself comes with a lot of challenges in terms of, you need to have as much reduced clothing as possible. You need to compress hair and, well, as much hair as you can and things like that. And the calibration of that is really important as well. And temperature, and there's a lot of pre-standardization that goes into that. So I think ADP, air displacement plasmography, is a lot less common. Um,
Yeah, you tend to see in some of the research institutes in the US where they've got it in-house and they
they've
can
got
do all
it,
that
yeah,
recalibration, but it's not like a DEXA where a truck can show up
yeah,
to a team and be able to start doing these tests.
and it takes time. It does
Yeah.
take a bit of time as well. What it is really useful for, like, say, from a, not even just a research, but if you really wanted to take a deep dive in, is because it does give you density and volume of the unit. It's really nice to have that to be able to plug in to, say, for compartmental models of examining body composition and things like that. But again, depending on how deep you want to go into the measurements of composition. But yeah, probably the next most common one after DEXA is BIA, bioelectrical impedance. The only issue with bioelectrical impedance is it's a doubly indirect measure. So where DEXA is an indirect measure, it's measuring and spitting out, its calculation. BIA is measuring, calculating, and then using equations to come up with different
Mhm.
tissues. So there's two levels, I guess, of
Of noise there.
calculation there. Yeah, two levels of noise, two levels of calculation. The thing that I tend to find with BIA, and I have this conversation all the time, is you get what you pay for. Um, we've got BIA systems here at LJMU, so we use the Seika systems, which tend to be so the medical grade. They're very expensive. The reason why we do that though is we have done a couple of in-house, I guess, reliability and validity studies across the different systems and found those to be the best and most sensitive to change. And when you compare those two DEXA, they tend to be pretty
Pretty
consistent,
pretty close, right? Yeah.
really close. Yeah.